Hello, folks. I'm Nick Bernardo, your host of MyGovWatch Live, the B2G Roundtable. If you're east of the Rocky Mountains here in the U.S., good afternoon. And good morning to those out west. And hello to anyone joining us from the far corners of the earth or watching online in the future. Today's Wednesday, December 13th, 2023. This series is brought to you by MyGovWatch. MyGovWatch is revolutionizing traditional bid notification by delivering leads in more than 200 industries using AI best practices at double the rate of free government tools and at a fraction of the cost of legacy websites. Big government contracts don't start with a solicitation, but all roads lead to one, and your budget for hearing about RFPs does not have to be thousands of dollars per year. Start your 14-day free trial today. So, folks, thank you for joining in this year-end wrap-up session of MyGovWatch, the B2G Roundtable. We do not have a co-host this month. I decided to just do this one myself. If you join us in future months, or if you check out the YouTube channel with prior sessions, you'll see that typically we might have another thought leader on with us. This month, it's just going to be us. It's a little bit of an intimate setting. Not much of an agenda today. I know there's some people who have submitted questions and who we will definitely bring on with us to join as panelists. If at any point you would like to be brought on as a panelist, just raise your hand, and I'll take that as an indication that you would like to jump in and ask a question. And I would also point out that there are always people on these sessions who are peers in the sense that they have experience pursuing government contracts. So I am not the only font of information about all this. Some of you audience members, you also know a thing or two about a thing or two. And if you feel like you can add to something, please raise your hand and I'll bring you on, and I'll keep you on if you would like to contribute in that way. So I know we have someone with us by the name of Rich DeHaven. And Rich, what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop my share and let's see if I can bring you on. So Rich, I am promoting you to a panelist, and we'll talk a little bit about what you'd like to talk about. Okay, Rich, it looks like you're on as a panelist. We just need your audio. You there, Rich?
There we go. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir. Welcome to MyGovWatch Live, the B2G Roundtable. And Rich, I'll just start by saying I like having, a very casual atmosphere with these sessions. I've been doing custom backgrounds based on the time of year. It's the holidays. I celebrate Christmas. Any fun holiday memories or stories that you can share with us before we get into this? I always like to put people on the spot and ask like an icebreaker question. I asked my wife earlier, what was the funniest thing that my kids had ever put on a Christmas list? And I'm still waiting to hear back. And I may get that answer during this session. So anything holiday related to share? Any plans?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a shocker for us because I'm in Texas. We go home to Wisconsin for Christmas every year. And usually when we leave here, it's about 60. And by the time we get out of the vehicle 16 hours later, it's usually -20. So we're really hoping that this year that doesn't happen, but it always seems to. So fingers are crossed that we can have somewhat of a normal Christmas, not in sub-zero temperatures.
Well, that's great. And where are you joining us from, and what do you do?
Texas. I'm a market manager at a telecommunications construction company. We're just now venturing off into the government side of things for work. And I saw this come across and I thought it sounded pretty interesting to join. And here we are.
Okay, so Rich, if I'm not mistaken, you had questions around different ways that companies can partner with one another around bid processes. Is that right?
Correct.
So just tell me a little bit about like what you've been reading about or what questions you might have in those veins.
Well, I was on another call yesterday and it was a roundtable, and it was brought to my attention that companies are doing consolidated bids, not so much as like a consolidation of companies. It's just they're two separate companies, but they're consolidating on their bids to try and win, market share of programs and stuff like that due to the pricing being lower in most situations, or if it's a lowest bid situation. It's allowing them to be more creative with their bidding and stuff like that. So is that something that's common in the government side or not?
Yes, I would say it's very common. And I think it depends on the tier of government in terms of how frequently it may happen or how open the government folks on the other side, the ones reviewing the bids, their receptiveness to it increases the further up the food chain you go. So when we talk about, local opportunities, there's nothing preventing any party from submitting a joint venture bid with another party, even for a small municipal or school district bid. That certainly happens. But when you get up into larger cities and counties and state government and the federal government, they see it all the time, right? So it's not necessarily received in a way that creates questions because they're used to doing business with teams of organizations to meet a need. And at the federal level, there's actually several terms of art in the regulations around this kind of thing. So there is something in the regulations federally called teaming arrangements. And teaming arrangements federally can be structured as a prime subcontract situation. So you call out your bid as a teaming bid, and you then characterize it as one party being the prime contractor and another party or parties being the subcontractor. That's one way of doing it. Another way is a true joint venture bid where you might establish an LLC with the express purpose of fulfilling the requirements of a bid process. There are programs federally as well around this kind of thing. There's a mentor protege program that's been out for, I don't know, maybe 5 years now. And there was a program predating that where one company can mentor a small business, right, that may not be as well versed in federal contracting. And there are advantages to creating teaming joint ventures using that program vehicle specifically. So yeah, I would say that it's very common. You just might need to, for very small government agencies, if you're thinking of submitting a team bid, ask yourself, does this need to be submitted as a joint venture? Or is it better if one party is just named as a subcontractor to the other party? So what do you think of that? And what are some follow-up questions you might have along those lines?
Well, I mean, you pretty much answered what I was inquiring about. It's just because they mentioned vehicles and stuff like that, and which one was going to be doing the prime and the subcontract piece of it. I wasn't very familiar with it, and it just seems like there's just different verbiage in this sector from what I'm used to. But for the most part, it's like I mentioned before, we're newer into this side of work, and we're looking for companies to potentially team up with or do it. Apprenticeship type situation with them to get us up to speed and teach us and stuff like that.
Have you looked into things enough to know whether or not you can assert that you're a small business for the purpose of federal contracts? And
No,
you even know what I mean by that question.
Right. We're not listed as a small business now.
Okay. So have you verified that in your NAICS code, you are not a small business?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So you can still team with other companies for federal contracts, but you would not be eligible to be a protege in the mentor protege program. You would be eligible to be a mentor in that program federally. Now, that doesn't mean you can't team with other organizations and submit joint venture bids. You absolutely can. So what are some things that that your partners would do? Like, what would be a typical project? What scope of work would you perform? And what might you need other organizations to help with?
Say for instance, like if we were doing telecommunications work and stuff like that, we would be working on like the towers, antennas, radios, installation, decommissioning. It would be more for like integration purposes, or supplier or OEM manufacturer type situations, for maybe potentially doing DAS system installations in airports and whatnot like that. So
Yeah, there's a ton of opportunity out there. We have a telecom category on MyGovWatch, and I'm always amazed at how much is actually happening around telecom, and not just federally, at the state and local level. There's just like so much that is happening out there with telecom, and it never ceases to amaze me. So, so this effort to secure government contracts, how far into it are you, and what are some other things that you're doing?
we're not super far into it. We've only been dabbling in it right now, just kind of looking over RFPs and stuff like that, and getting the feel for it for probably about the last couple months. We're working through building up our company's portfolio to prepare to potentially join with other larger companies as a subcontractor to the prime and so on. That's really about all the further we've gotten with that. So we're not too far into it.
Yeah, there's just so many different ways to skin the cat, and I would encourage you to really take a broad view of the kinds of projects you can get involved in, because there might be partnership opportunities out there that you just hadn't thought of. So I would not hold myself out as an expert in telecom opportunities per se, but one thing that we're always presented with, not just in this session, but in other conversations we have with people using our website, is that they're always asking, is government, they might say something like, well, the bid always goes to the lowest bidder, or do they always hire a company that is set up in their town or in their county? And one thing that I always like telling people is that there are no hard and fast rules in government contracting, meaning there are certainly things that are generally true, or true more often than they're not true. But as you get further into this, just realize that there is no one path to success. You may find that your path to success is as a prime contractor, and you may find that you like not having to deal with the customer by being a subcontractor. And there are no hard and fast rules around that. I wonder if if there's any preconceived ideas you have around it.
I guess the way that we were looking at it was kind of exactly what you said, is like we have mixed feelings about going and trying to do the prime with direct contact with the customers and so forth. Considering we're new to this area, we are more looking to be like a subcontractor to a prime, get up to speed with how the processes roll, baby steps. You know what I mean? We want to crawl before we start running, and maybe see if we can get some low-hanging fruit while learning at the same time. Look at it more of as like an entrepreneurship situation, to where we're getting paid to learn and then graduate on into potentially the prime position. But that's a ways down the road. So
yeah, it's that is actually a very proven way of getting into government contracting, is specifically looking to be a sub in the beginning. And I'm not saying that's right for everyone. Just like I said earlier, there's different ways to do this, but that is certainly a proven way that people get into this game. And a couple of things I would say about that. Let me phrase this as a question. Have you noticed, and I don't know whether you're using our site or another site to get your leads, but have you noticed, like on our site, when you see an opportunity on our site, we push you over to where the lead came from, and oftentimes they'll have a list of the interested parties on the government website where the documents would live. Have you noticed that?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's going to be a great way for you to do some traditional marketing and reaching out and cold calling people around, what their plans are. Do they ever use subcontractors? That's a great way to do it. I'm glad you're aware of that. Are you familiar with the open records process?
No, not really.
Okay, so this is something we also offer on the site, but you could do this too. You are able to access information after contracts are awarded, such as you can get a list of potential bidders, you can get a list of actual bidders, you can get copies of the winning and even the losing vendors' proposals. So that is something through what's called the Freedom of Information Act federally, or at the state and local level. It has different names in different states. So in Texas, they have an open records law, and you're able to get a lot of that information. And those kinds of documents often contain all kinds of names, phone numbers, and email addresses of people who you might want to reach out to.
Great. That's good information to have. Thank you so much.
It can be a little time consuming to do it. So we offer it on our site. You can just have us do it. It's like an order fulfillment type thing, but there's nothing preventing you from doing it yourself.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So Rich, stay with us. And I think let's just see who else we have. Sam, I see you've raised your hand. Sam, I'm going to bring you on now. Rich, you can just stay with us and you can go on mute. You can ask follow-up questions if you'd like, but I'm going to bring Sam on because I know Sam had a question or want to talk about something that might be of interest to you as well, Rich. So Sam, I'm going to bring you on as a panelist.
Hey, Nick. How are you?
Sam, welcome. Where are you joining us from and what do you do?
Yeah, I'm joining you guys from Miami, Florida. I'm a sales director for Telefonica Tech in US. So it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Thanks for joining it. And what does your company do?
Well, Telefonica is a very large telco company, headquarters in Madrid, Spain, and with a global presence in multiple countries in Europe, in Latin America, and US. We're about a $50 billion organization with about 100,000 employees globally. We do a lot of stuff, but my division, which is Telefonica Tech, which is about 6,000 employees organization, we are a managed service provider. We provide cloud solutions. We provide cybersecurity solutions as a service. And we act in a B2B mode. So we sell to private and government sectors, all kinds of companies that need IT and outsourcing IT services.
It's a huge market. And might you have reason to network with someone like Rich?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, and I will just say this, and this goes for any audience members who'd like to ask a question, raise your hand, we'll bring you on. We have had people from these sessions end up doing business together. So I'm always asking, like, what do you do? Because there might be some match that can be made in the session or after if I can share email addresses. So what brings you here today, Sam, and what are you looking to accomplish? What are your goals for 2024 with government contracting?
Yeah, we are very interested to expand our presence in US and Canada through the government. We have a huge presence in Europe through our headquarters in Spain, and many government agencies are our customers in UK as well. But we are trying really to expand that and bring that experience to US. And and we see there's a lot of opportunities. The government and more need IT, need cybersecurity, cloud, AI. We're also bringing AI applications to the US market. My question to you, as we're focusing the government sector, especially right now, local government, and we would like to understand there is a way we can be a little bit advised before the RFP is issued, because once the RFP is issued, most of those agencies, they enter in a silent mode. We can't interact until the decision is made. But if we could have some way to know a little bit earlier that they are working a procurement process that we're going to be issuing RFP, we could definitely engage and offer a little bit more information. So I think that would be extremely beneficial for everybody in the process.
Yes, and everything you said is spot on. Once the bid comes out, there's a cone of silence, and you have to communicate through the documented process that they lay out. But I always encourage people to understand that when there is not a bid process, it's really just traditional sales at that point, right? You're a little bit of a detective because you're trying to find out, like, who should I be talking to in different government agencies? And it's not fundamentally different than trying to figure out who are the decision makers in a private organization. there's just another layer of government, terminology and process and procedure that comes along with it. But there's nothing stopping you if you know the name and phone number of someone who's involved in something and there's not a bid. Pick up the phone, say hello, try to get a Zoom meeting via, an email or an unsolicited phone call, and those kinds of things can happen. Are you familiar with sources sought notices federally?
No, I'm not.
Okay. So when the federal government is planning to buy something, often they will put out a sources sought notice because they're not quite sure who can provide the service or how many companies can typically, or how many responses might they get, depending on what their requirements are. So that's something we publish through MyGovWatch. We're monitoring federal sites to make sure that if there's a sources sought notice, that you hear about that if it's in your industry. So whenever you see something federally that says sources sought, especially if it's for managed services for IT, I would encourage a response. And here's why. They're not saying a contract will definitely come from it, but that is your opportunity. That is one opportunity to influence the procurement that results from it. So typically there might be a sources sought notice, and then 6 months later, there might be a solicitation. If you respond to the sources sought notice, you can give them information that might not only influence what they put into the bid requirements, but that might benefit you specifically, right? So that's something you should be looking at federally. We talked a little bit about open records with Rich. That's something I would be looking at, because whenever there is a technology purchase that might be adjacent to what you do, you should be paying attention to those procurements. So what are some services, some IT services that you do not provide, right, that is purchased through the bid process? For example, do you do help desk services? What would be something that you do not do?
Well, the IT world is very extensive. I mean, we try to cover a lot of stuff. I mean, we offer multi-cloud, but depending on the cloud, like we work with Azure, AWS, and Google, but depending on the cloud, we might not have some specific services, depending, because we require training people to be certified. So we do not cover all the different angles of the cloud, but we do certain things, right? Like Oracle Cloud, for instance, we do not have a practice on that. If you need a cloud on Oracle, I might not cover that right now, and so that's something we don't do.
Okay, so what I'm hinting at is, even though you cannot communicate with the buyer in various ways during a bid process when you're bidding, you should be looking at other procurements as opportunities to find out who are the decision makers. So for example, if there's a bid process now for Oracle Cloud, you're not bidding on it. But if there is a pre-bid meeting and maybe it's a Zoom, you should try to attend that. Because even though you're not bidding on it, you might see 3 or 4 names on the screen, and those are the decision makers for the next thing that they buy 6 months from now. So I would be keeping tabs on active procurements, whether you use our site or another site to do that. And that will inevitably, because so much around technology is being purchased at every level of government, if you're paying attention to other IT purchases and who is involved in those, you will over time develop a list of decision makers in different jurisdictions.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Nick. Another question I have for you, and I've been using your services, your site for a few months, and I'm very glad for that. It's been extremely helpful. But another thing would be helpful if we can, I don't know if you provide that, or maybe I'm not that fluent yet to figure out, but if you have a history of all the purchases, which I could see, because a lot of those contracts are annually or 3 years old, and after every 2-3 years, they refresh, right? If I could track that, it will give me a better hint about where I should focus and proactively approach, because there are so many agencies. It's very difficult to be approaching everybody without having any kind of intelligence around that.
Yeah, and so we actually offer services in some industry that we call premium services. And premium services, unfortunately, we do not have an offering for premium services in the technology space. But what we do for those is we automatically do open records requests so that we have a lot of that information. you know, at some point we might elevate IT to be what we would call a premium market. It's just not one yet. But what you could do, if you take a long-term view of this, you could do the open records requests or have us do them, and then you would have the dates of the future purchasing. So it's very time consuming. You could have a budget and just say, you know what, I'm going to have the folks at MyGovWatch do 100 open records requests for different types of purchasing around IT. And as long as you're taking a long-term view of it, over time, you would have that information and know when those bids are coming out again and when they're due to be procured again.
Yeah, makes sense, Nick. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, do you do much traveling in your business?
Oh yeah, definitely. We cover many regions. We've been trying to focus in some areas, East Coast first, and then West Coast. But definitely, with travel, we also have operations in Latin America and Europe. So we kind of interact with multinationals that have footprint globally, and so it requires us to be traveling and interacting in a face-to-face way with many of them.
Are you looking forward to some time off around the holidays this year?
Well, I hope so. At least the last week of the year, I plan to maybe take some time off and just relax. But yeah, but next week we'll still be around working.
It's always interesting to me, and I say this to people all the time. December and August are my favorite months because, you know, you can be productive and you can get things done, but there's not a million people coming at you because and I think a lot of people on this session today are probably in business development. They just sort of leave you alone in December, don't they?
Well, definitely. In my case, because my company fiscal year ends at the end and with a calendar year, so we got a bunch of things to do. Wrap it up the numbers to achieve the goals, and as well as planning for next fiscal year. So it's kind of busy as well for. But you're right. A lot of people start taking time off, and it's more difficult to interact. But we have a lot of internal work. That's what I mean. That require us to expend a lot of time on it as well.
Well, I want to say one more thing, and then I have a final question for you, Sam. Some of the other folks on the line who indicated when they signed up that they might like to introduce their business. I'm just going to mention your name, Michelle. You said you might be interested in introducing your business. If that's still true, please raise your hand. And also Meredith Wheeler, you mentioned that you might be interested in introducing your business. So anyone who raises their hand, I'm going to bring you on and we'll broaden the conversation. And I guess my last question for you, Sam, is what is coming in technology that the average person on this call isn't aware of, but that people in your industry are talking about?
Well, that's a great question. Technology is such a very dynamic market. And I mean, I would be honest with you, just few people really know what's going to happen in the next 10 years in technology because so many new trends and all of a sudden everything can change. But right now, I mean, the big topic that everybody's talking about, and I think is becoming, is reaching out the consumer market as well, is AI, right? Artificial intelligence, how it's going to really automate a lot of human activities and how reliable is this. But what we have seen the last few months is a huge acceleration in that area with a lot of investments in the startups, and even the big players are investing billions of dollars on this. So but I don't think this is kind of news, but it's just in the last 12 months, it's being accelerating like crazy. So we are also preparing for that, and we believe this is going to really shape the future of technology in the next few years.
Well, we've started using it in our system to help route the correct leads to the right people. And it's not perfect, but it works pretty well. And I also get the sense that we're just at the tip of the iceberg, even though we've been talking about this for 3 or 4 years now. So Sam, you're welcome to stay with us. You can stay on video, audio, you can turn it off, whatever you'd like. But joining us now is Michelle. And Michelle, could you please help me so I don't butcher your last name?
Sure, it's Gertie.
Welcome. And we have a little bit of feedback. I don't know if you have an extra set of speakers or something, or maybe another line open?
Yeah, let me try something here. There, is that better?
That is 1,000 times better. So Michelle, where are you joining us from and what do you do?
Yeah, let me just adjust my volume here. There we go. I am joining you from do you still hear the feedback?
No, you sound great.
Right.
You sound great.
Okay, good. I am in the northwest corner of Minnesota, Carlstead, Minnesota. We're a stone's throw from Canada.
Okay,
So,
well,
and
my 13-year-old son, who is obsessed with maps, had me one night just trace the route of the Mississippi River all the way up, and we sort of
wow.
lost track of it somewhere. Is it near you? Or does it start in Canada?
It's in Minneapolis, so it's in the biggest metropolitan area.
But the headwaters, is that in Canada or is it on our
Okay,
side?
no, good question. The Mississippi headwaters are not far from here. I was
Okay.
just there over 4th of July.
Well, what should I look for on the map? Because we ultimately gave up.
Well, you'll find the headwaters by Bemidji, Minnesota.
Okay.
And then if you go an hour and a half northwest of there, you'll see Carlstead,
Carlston.
north of Thief River Falls,
Okay, I'm going to be looking for that.
south
So-
of Winnipeg. Okay.
Isn't
So
every-
I'm
isn't
with
everything?
yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about my company. I hear the feedback, but I'm going to try to ignore it here. I'm with Matrax, and we're a global manufacturer and provider of tracks, rubber track conversions for all sorts of vehicles, and we do a lot of business in the military, to the federal government. So we've been around about 30 years. We're listed on the GSA schedule. And I just joined the company a couple months ago. So I'm just looking to learn how we can increase some of our federal sales. I just talked to our VP of sales this morning, and he said a lot of our bids just come through our listing on the GSA schedule.
Yeah, and I think if I'm not mistaken, we were talking a little bit about how much flexibility do they have with where they put things on the GSA schedules? Is that right?
Yeah, I wondered that too. We're in one category, but we could be in more.
Yeah, and I do get the feedback again, but we can keep going. And I don't think you hear it when I'm speaking, do you?
No.
Okay. So I spoke with Nicole Potroff, and Nicole is a well-known GovCon attorney, and she's with Co-Prince McCall Potroff. And I highly recommend anyone who's watching this now, or maybe watching it in the future, go to smallgovcon.com, and that is a website they maintain with a ton of informational articles about mostly federal contracting, and it's a tremendous resource. And Nicole's a partner at the firm, and we spoke about this yesterday, and she sort of alluded to me that that there's a tremendous amount of flexibility that folks have in the federal government concerning whether or not they buy through the GSA on one hand, and then if they are buying through the GSA, where does that product belong in the GSA schedules, right? So many of their decisions are subject to being challenged, but ultimately, if it's just like, a decision they're making that has any kind of rational basis, they can do it. So, and I think I asked this question, but for the benefit of everyone else, have you been on things that were GSA and then non-GSA?
Yes, I guess we have.
Okay, and just for the benefit of anyone who may not be aware of some of these terms, I'm going to go over what that is, but before I do that, can you be a little bit more specific about like where would your components be used in the implementation of them in federal buying?
Right. So we would be an added attachment or a replacement for tires in combat vehicles. So it could be very likely a custom design that we do for the military. So, tanks, all sorts of vehicles, even autonomous vehicles.
Well, Yeah, it just occurs to me that the federal government must purchase a tremendous number of tires. But I have a trivia question. I like to keep these fun. I'm going to go a little off topic here. You should appreciate this. This is a trick question. I'm warning you in advance. Who is the #1 manufacturer of tires on the planet?
Michelin.
No, and I'm just going to give the answer. It's Lego.
Really? No way.
Now, the tires might be an inch tall, but no one makes more tires than Lego.
I love it. I'm going to use that one.
Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting business, and for anyone who's not familiar with GSA, I'm just going to give like a 30-second overview. So the government has had the General Services Administration as sort of a clearinghouse for items that the government regularly purchases that are commodities or that it views as commodities. And what the GSA does is it signs vendors to a contract that is a 5-year hunting license contract. And GSA's funding, only a tiny percentage, I think like 1% of its funding comes from Congress. Most of the GSA's funding comes from what's called the industrial funding fee. Do they still call it that? Yeah, okay. They still call it the industrial funding fee. So if you sell, $100 of product to the government through a GSA contract, you now owe the GSA 75 cents. And I think that's the way that it works. And so if the government is buying through a GSA contract, it's generally contacting the vendors directly who are on predetermined lists of who is eligible to bid on those contracts. So if you sell a commodity, you want to look into whether or not there is a GSA schedule for it. But the federal government does not need to use GSA schedules. However, there's tremendous advantages to it because the GSA is pre-negotiating ceiling rates for products and services. So for example, if Michelle is selling tires to a federal agency that's buying through the GSA, Michelle's company has already agreed that the lowest price that Michelle's company has offered commercially is the highest price that a federal government agency would ever pay.
Right.
So,
I was surprised to find our price list out there because we don't normally share that. But of course, that's part of the GSA schedule.
yeah, and it's a really interesting dynamic. Everybody wants to be in government contracting, but nobody wants their information to be public.
Right. Isn't that funny?
So it's a double-edged sword for sure. So going into next year, what are you trying to accomplish?
We want to expand not just domestically, but internationally. I know we're talking about our domestic government, but we also sell to military organizations all over the world. So it's one of our goals. But we also want to improve awareness and be sure we're not missing any bids and deals because we do have competition in this space.
Yeah, and so I'll just tell you, we are tracking U.S. purchases only on MyGovWatch. However, I wonder if NATO, for example, I wonder if there are any piggybacking arrangements between the Department of Defense and NATO. Have you ever looked into that?
I haven't yet. I'm just, like I said, digging into this. I've sold to the government in a technology industry, but not here in manufacturing, but I'll bring that up.
Yeah, because I would think that maybe some of the NATO countries, and obviously it's not just NATO, but NATO would be the obvious next step for military purchases. I would think that they want their domestic suppliers as well, but who knows if the Czech Republic has a company that can even make tires for their military, right?
That's interesting.
So
we do a lot of business in Israel, but I'd be interested too if Susi is our big competitor that does a lot of military work. Are they a subscriber of MyGovWatch?
We have so many users. I just don't have them memorized. I wish I could.
Yeah.
I can tell you this. Are you aware of usaspending.gov?
No.
So usaspending.gov is an extremely valuable tool that anyone on this session or listening in the future should be aware of. It's a portal for looking at which government agencies are buying which products and services historically. Now, it doesn't offer like pricing in most cases, but it may tell you, you know, an overall dollar amount committed to a contract to SUSE, right? So
Sure.
you might, and you can actually look up vendors on that site. You can look up activities by NAICS code, which, you know, half the time is not correct, but it's still something that you can do on usaspending.gov. So I would recommend that that you spend some time, just get familiar with the kinds of data that's available on that site. We're not currently consuming that data. Some of our competitors are, but we find that rather than, you know, upcharging people to access data they can get on their own, we just tell people go to usaspending.gov. There's a ton of information on there, and I suspect, Michelle, that you would spend a lot of time on that website.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. So what are some other challenges that you have with government contracting, or what are some things that have happened in your career to date that, you know, have been challenges, or things that, like, how are you trying to help your new organization using your background?
Right. And I guess I'm, from a marketing and lead gen perspective, thinking about how can we reach the right people. You know, it's a different form of marketing. Traditionally, the Matrix has been to several government trade shows. I don't know that if that's as effective as it used to be. In the past, I used to go to many of them.
Yeah. Well, this is something that comes up fairly often. There are certainly people who, and this is my personal belief, there are certainly people who might have forever distanced themselves from physical events as a result of COVID. And I
Right.
think there's a segment of that that's just never coming back, because people see, like, you can do this event virtually, you can do anything virtual, almost anything virtually. However, I do believe that there is fundamental value to the personal touch. If there is an event, if there is something that, you know, the Department of Defense is holding, and they're inviting vendors to come to it, I certainly encourage people, if they budget for it, they should certainly do those kinds of things, because I think there's nothing better than pressing the flesh and doing things that would be considered classic sales and marketing events, and actually being in front of people. I think there's a tremendous amount of value to that still.
I agree.
Segment of people who are still willing to engage at physical events.
Especially when you have a product that needs to be seen to appreciated.
Yeah, and now how do you demo your product, right? Because, you know, if I'm a government person, maybe I procure for the DoD. Do you find that people who procure are specialized in you know, just vehicle parts, or do you find that somebody who's buying vehicle parts might also be buying ammunition?
You know, I'm learning this industry on our side, but what I've heard and read is they're specialized.
Yeah,
You know, and
yeah,
we're
that's been my
invited
understanding
to
too.
testing and demos. You know, it's a pretty extensive process.
Yeah. And tell me a little bit about, well, I will tell you something that I learned in the last year, and you can decide what to do with it. We studied the purchases that are ending up on sam.gov,
Yeah.
and a lot of folks are looking things up on sam.gov based on a NAICS code. And we actually wrote an article about this. We looked at a large data set, and we found that up to 40% of items on sam.gov have an incorrect NAICS code assignment.
Really?
Yeah. Now, in your case, it's a better number. Product NAICS code assignments, when we looked at the data, they were about 75% correct. But still, when you think about it, 25% of the time, they're putting the wrong NAICS code on it. So how would you ever find it? Because if you've ever searched sam.gov, you know that the titles that they give are generally gobbledygook, or they don't often name things, you know, tires for this.
Right.
They don't always.
That's the challenge.
Yeah. So what our system does, and this is unique, we think this is unique. We are not only using AI to look at the content of the bid, we are looking at the NAICS code in relation to the product service code. And that is something that I would recommend that you study a little bit. So what you'll find is, is there a certain NAICS code that your stuff would generally fall under?
Yeah, I can't remember what it is though.
Yeah, and that's fine. Let's just call it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if your NAICS code is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you might find that the product service code, which is also on almost every sam.gov item, if it's A, B, C, D, that might be a tell that it's probably a correct NAICS code assignment.
Mm-hmm.
And you might find other NAICS codes. So what we also found when we looked at the data is that if they put the wrong NAICS code on it, they might typically pick something else that would not be intuitive to you, but that might be close enough. So if you're looking at, or if you're searching SAM.gov using NAICS codes, don't just limit it to one that you know is correct. Also search based on which ones would they pick if they didn't pick the right one, if that makes sense.
Right, because that bothered me. There were combat vehicles, non-combat vehicles, accessories. There's multiple categories that would fit us.
Yeah, and so our system recognizes those combinations and uses that information to try to send people the right leads so that they don't have to search SAM.gov every day.
Great, that's good to know.
Yeah. And I think, Michelle, you're a good example of someone on the session today who has good experience in government contracting. Everyone on this session today, you could learn something from Michelle, let me tell you.
I just need to apply it to this business, but
Yeah.
I know it's a whole different animal, right?
Well, I'm going to bring Meredith on, and Michelle, you're free to join us. And were there follow-up questions, or you just want to hang out for a while?
I'll just hang out for a while.
Okay. And I would like to sort of tap into your brain if a question comes up that I'm not familiar with, because that does happen.
Sure, I'll help if I can.
Meredith is going to join us. And Rich, I'm going to kick you out, but you can come back in. Meredith, welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. What are you doing? Where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Houston, Texas, and my business is Sesh Co-working. We're a co-working space located inside the city, and we do everything flexible office and meeting space. So we have 40 offices, open workspace, we have an event space, 4 conference rooms, and a training room.
Well, that is a fascinating business model, and I've seen it in our area as well, and I'm in the Philadelphia area, and I've certainly seen things like this as the concept has evolved in the last 10 or 15 years. What has been your experience so far in trying to get the attention of government buyers, or how far along are you in that process?
Yeah, so I'm new in the process. Our business, we're a very small business. I'm the co-owner along with my business partner, and we have a team of 3 underneath us as well. And we just received our woman-owned certification about maybe 3 months ago. So I'm very, very green to the whole process. So I've been listening very intently. But we have won an RFP from a university here in Texas. And I think there's a lot of promise and opportunity for it, but I think that there's still a lot of people who don't really know what it means to be a co-working space. And so there's a bit of education that comes with it, especially for folks in government, and explaining, no, it's probably not what you've seen and heard about WeWork. It's actually more just meeting your facility needs offsite in a customized fashion. And so that's been a hump. And then also just learning, getting through the RFPs, trying to figure out which ones we qualify for. It's a lot. This is a crazy world to be dropped into.
Yeah, well,
Meredith, that's what I did in my past world. Like 3 years ago, I managed a co-op center or co-working center, and also an accelerator for startups.
No way.
Yeah, in South Dakota.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so I feel your pain. It's an interesting challenge.
It is, yeah.
Well, and Meredith, and if you don't mind, what was how did they call the RFP that you won? Like, what did they call the need? What did they say they were buying?
They said that they were buying a facility to headquarter their accelerator.
Okay, and what was the scope of the need? Like, what were the requirements of that?
So they said that they needed 7 individual desks, space, and for those desks and then the desks themselves, They needed a private office and access to event space and conference room space was how it was explained.
And in your proposal, did you find yourself saying, well, we do this, or did you find yourself having to explain in the proposal that, you know, is it difficult communicating how your solution is what they were looking for, or is it exact, or did it line up completely?
It pretty much lined up completely. And I will say, we're so grateful. We had actually won a grant in 2021 from this same university. It's Texas Women's University. And so when they released this RFP, this was before we were certified. This is actually our second year winning the RFP. And they reached out to us and said, hey, you know that you ladies qualify for this. And we were like, oh, really? So we had assistance in applying for it the first round because we were very much out of our element by that time. By the second one that I applied for over summer, I've had my feet underneath me much better with it. And we had already worked with them for a year. So we really knew what they were looking for the second go round. And thankfully we did win it again for a second year.
If just from memory, do you remember how big was pricing in the award of that? In other words, was it a low bid situation or was price a small part of it?
Price was a not insignificant part of it, but it was definitely not the only factor in criteria. It was very much, there was a lot about what we already do in the community, how involved we are with women entrepreneurs. And there were some things like that, reputation, past work, but price was still a part of it.
Yeah, and we always advise folks that are newer to this market, and just back to open records again. So sometimes we tell people, well, if you lose a bid, that's a reason to get details on who else bid and what the pricing was. But as it turns out, even when you win, it can be extremely beneficial to know like, where was your pricing as a part of that? Because now, you know, just among us girls, now you've had this contract for a couple years. Well, if you knew the pricing that was submitted and maybe you were on the low end, probably you would win it again at a much higher rate. So we always advise people, and this is where straw purchasing of the FOIA information comes in. So people on our site can order us to do it. We'll get the information and the user's fingerprints are not on it. So we're doing that. We're doing that function for our users today. And that's something you should consider. Whether you have us do it or someone else do it, there's attorneys out there that do it. It is something that's worthwhile. But what are some of the pain points that you're seeing as you go further down this road?
Navigating the bids to see what we qualify for and trying to categorize ourselves. You asked about the NAICS code to Michelle earlier, and I thought to myself, oh my God, we have like 4 or 5 and I don't know any of them. I have them on a capability statement, of course, but because we do so much, we can do so many things in terms of space, it can be hard to put us down into a box and then see which other boxes we check off on those RFPs. So navigating where we fall when I'm scrolling a list of hundreds and hundreds of bids.
Yeah, there are some, and that's a great comment. And we see this all the time with people signing up for our site. Sometimes it'll be an extremely straightforward thing. I talked to a guy who has an HVAC company in Georgia this morning, and that's an extremely straightforward thing. He does HVAC. He works on HVAC in Georgia, and he just sees the bids, and it's very simple. But your use case, whether you're using our site or another site, you really have to back out of it in terms of like, how much time do you have in a week or in a month to devote to it? And then say, okay, this is how much time I have to devote, and I'm just going to spend this amount of time and see what comes out of it. Because it could be a full-time job based on what it sounds like you're doing.
Yes, it could. And I lead all the other sales side in our business as well. So I'm doing 2 jobs, I think.
Well, and something that our site does, and I'm trying not to make this a commercial about our site, but this is important because it's a time saver, whether you use our site or a competitor. We're sending an email every day, today's lead digest. So if you put certain words into the system, So we're categorizing everything in the system as real estate or administrative needs, right? And I tell people they're like aisles in a supermarket. So we have a real estate aisle, and a lot of titles end up in that. We have a facilities category, and a lot of things will end up in that. Then if you put keywords on top of it, instead of scanning, hundreds of new things per day, if certain words pop up, that's going to be at the very top of the email that you get the next morning, right? So are there certain words that or phrases that are a tell that you should look into it?
Yeah, I think so. Probably rental is a big one. Office space, conference room, meeting space. I definitely have some keywords I can put in there. And
Yeah.
then can I ask you this? So since we're a location and we're selling a service in a location, we're not CPG. I should probably should I just focus on working with the local entities, city, state, municipalities, rather than browsing nationally to see if someone is in Philadelphia that's looking for space in Houston? Is that a common thing?
We have a real estate category, but I don't hold myself out as an expert in those opportunities. It's an interesting question. I would need to know a little bit more about like exactly what are you offering. So in other words, are you one physical space, or do you have other spaces, or is it literally one location?
One right now.
Okay, and so you have a percent capacity, you have a capacity number, and you have a percent utilization number, right? And so
Correct.
I would say this. I would say that certainly you're going to focus on Texas, right? I think that's sort of an obvious thing, but there are a lot of federal purchases that might be associated with Washington, D.C. in our system, where the activity is ultimately happening somewhere else, right?
Okay.
So for example, something like 80% of opportunities federally in our system are DC, Virginia, Maryland based. So if I had, knowing the real estate needs of the federal government, I would have Texas, and I would have some of the north, around the DC Beltway states, because you'll have visibility to a lot of federal purchasing around real estate that where the need is not in DC, the purchasing is just happening from DC.
Okay, that makes sense. And I'm taking notes just so you know I'm not.
Oh, and by the way, we're recording this, and it'll be on YouTube by the end of the
Okay,
week.
great.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, that's very helpful. I will most definitely look into that.
And I apologize for not knowing this, Meredith, but are you using our site today?
I have only used it on the basic free level, just because I haven't wanted to make any financial commitments as I'm learning, and thus waste our time and money.
Yeah,
at least now I'm starting to learn a little more, and I can start to join.
Understood. Well, if you ever want to spend any time looking at things on Zoom, we can do that as well.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. So stay with us. I think Harshal wants to join. So Harshal, I'm going to bring you on. And Meredith, do you have follow-up questions while we're bringing Harshal on?
No, I think I'm good. It's been very helpful information. I've taken a lot of notes. Thank you.
Well, it's a lot of fun, and I think this is probably true about many people. I didn't wake up one morning when I was 21 years old and say I want to be involved in government contracting. It's just like anyone else on this session. It just sort of happened. Who knows how we ever got into what our fields are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Nick. So my
Hi,
name is
Harshal. Welcome. Where are you joining us from, and what do you do?
well, I'm joining from New York City, and we are into a business of Salesforce consulting. Okay, so we are providing anything with regards to Salesforce. When they go for a licensing, after that they would require a Salesforce consulting partner to do the entire deployment of each and every components which are there in Salesforce, based on the compliance of the industry what they belong to.
And I'm sorry, was that a question?
No.
Oh, okay. So, and you're doing a lot in Salesforce. And so what's been your experience with government contracting? Are you bidding on contracts?
So I've just recently started now. okay? And I'm just trying to understand more in detail how it works.
Okay, well, the good news is there is a tremendous amount of government purchasing around Salesforce. Because Salesforce can do so many different things, the government is onto that, and they are sometimes buying specifically Salesforce products, or they're buying integrations involving Salesforce, or they're often publishing solicitations where they're not saying they need Salesforce, but you can propose Salesforce, right?
Right.
And so, and I apologize for not knowing this, Harshal. Are you using our site today?
At the moment, yes, but it is a basic version.
Okay. All right. And when did you start using the site?
Recently, few days back.
Okay. Okay. So if you're in a trial, you should have the ability to see, did you sign up for a regional or a national?
At the moment, it's regional.
Regional. So you should see like 6 states worth of opportunities. So I would say this, and this is something that's not really, this is not about our website. This is about government purchasing in general. Don't look at what's happening in December as indicative of how many things there are in the course of a year or a few years. On our site, you can look at the closed section and it will show you everything from the last year. And then you can just type in Salesforce and you should see a lot of things from the last year involving Salesforce or integrations or other types of purchases where Salesforce might be the solution. So even though there's not a lot of procurements, or there's still a lot in December, the busiest time is going to be the first half of the year. And there's still a lot in the second half of the year, but it just doesn't compare to the first half of the year. So what are some questions that you have around what you're doing so far, Harshal?
So I have a question because I belong to, I'm a non-resident, okay? And I frequently do travel to US and, I formed a company, LLC, and I prefer to stay in, out of the US for, for more than, 6 years, six or 7 months, and then I come back. So I keep on traveling, okay? So I wanted to understand more in detail whether the Salesforce, what I understand with the draft requirement, so they only specifically deal only with only with the resident people, or is there a way or any sort of chances wherein I can also apply for RFP and win the RFP?
Yeah, so do you have a US corporation?
Yes, I do have a US, so it's an LLC.
Okay, you have a US LLC. Do you have any physical presence in the US?
Not really.
Okay.
So we do have office in New York, okay. But that's a virtual office, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say this is another case where I am not an expert on the details of what they're allowing. I can tell you that for federal contracts, there's a much greater likelihood that they would require the work to be done in the US. I'm not saying 100% of the time, but typically the federal government might be a little bit more sensitive to where the work is happening, particularly around IT. Now, at the state and local level, I suspect that they would want to take advantage of the cost savings of the different labor markets that are out there and the reasons why people would use offshore resources for development work. So I think you would probably find more success at the state and local level. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't certain federal opportunities where you could participate.
So for your website, I just wanted to understand, if I go with a premium opportunity, like premium plan, so because I was just going through a few of the things in your website, so I was not able to see much more things in Salesforce. So it's like yearly I'm able to see around 4 to 5 RFPs which are getting generated. So I'm not sure, is it only for the basic plan which I'm able to see 4 to 5 RFPs, or the view is it will be a read-only access for me, and then when I subscribe, then it will become permanent. I can see all the RFPs. So how the system works, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and Harshal, what I'd like to do is I would like to schedule something with you offline, and that could happen as early as tomorrow. if you'd
Okay.
like. Because I don't want to, this is meant to be educational. So, what I'll promise is I'll send you an email as soon as we're done with today's session, and we can talk tomorrow if you're free, and we can talk specifically about your use case. But your trial period, just like for anyone listening, over the course of 14 days, you can see everything in those 6 states, right? And it just happens to be that we're at a part in December where the government is not doing as many RFPs this time of year. However, something could be new tomorrow in the system that would be perfect, right? And there's just no predicting that.
All right, I got it.
Yeah, so I will send you an email to follow up. And just while you're thinking of some follow-up questions, Harshal, if you have some other questions, we can take those. But I'm just going to say this, folks, these sessions, they can be anywhere from an hour to an hour and 45 minutes. We're just at an hour now, an hour and 5 minutes, actually. And I just want to open it up. If there's anyone who is with us who hasn't asked a question, now would be a time to raise your hand and I will bring you on. You can introduce your business, tell us a little bit about what you do. There could be somebody on the session who wants to do business with you. You can ask a question about government contracting. We can answer that. But now would be the time to raise your hand if you folks would like to keep going with this session. And if not, that's fine too. We can wrap it up. But let's just see what other questions there are. So Harshal, just before you go, do you have any other questions that are about government contracting in general?
Oh, that's fair enough. So far, I understood, the basics that what is required. So I will, try to get you, get connected offline. And just to network about my company. So can I just put my
Yes, please
website?
tell us a little bit about what you do for anyone who may be listening.
Yeah, so I can put it on the chat if anyone wants to see about my company. So
Go ahead.
If anyone is having any sort of requirement with regards to Salesforce, we can work with them and try to help them out for Salesforce specifically.
Let me ask you this question, Harshal. What are the most common misconceptions about Salesforce? Things that people believe about Salesforce that are not true.
So I think my wife can actually give you a clear answer because she's expert in Salesforce. Okay, so I'll just hand it over to her, and she can give you a clear idea that how Salesforce exactly works. Okay, just give me one.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, welcome to MyGovWatch Live. What's your name? And I understand that you all are more than just business partners.
Yes, so my name is Payal, and I have 5 years experience in working on Salesforce. So leading a project, and then I also have some admin knowledge on Salesforce. So I can guide you if you have any questions related to it.
Well, thank you for joining us. And what is the most interesting thing about working with Salesforce?
Interesting because Salesforce is a very huge platform right now. So it's a #1 company, but it's also a very huge platform where we can get new ideas or new knowledge about it, how Salesforce work, what is a sales, different kinds of new releases comes up. Uh, it's very challenging, but it's very, you can say, enjoying that work, what I'm currently doing in Salesforce.
Well, I have used Salesforce in the past, and I understand that there's just about any need, Salesforce can be used to meet that need, and that's what's always been really interesting about Salesforce to me. So, thank you for contributing that. So folks, I just want to ask one more time if there's anything else. I have certainly more time if there's any other questions. So I'll just see if there's any other hands up. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, in that case, folks, what we're going to do is we're going to wrap it up. So let me just do this. Let me share. Share. What am I sharing? Okay. So folks, with that, that'll do it for today's edition of MyGovWatch Live. Remember, if you're not already a subscriber, start your free 14-day trial of mygovwatch.com today. And you'll see on the screen also that we're doing a price increase in January. So anyone who signs up before the end of the month will not see that price increase because you'll be grandfathered under the current year pricing. And if you want to win more government contracts for less, you'll be glad that you did. Folks, thank you very much for joining, and have a very happy holiday season.